So one spring, just before my trip to the UU General Assembly a few years ago, General Assembly is our annual convention as a religion, I was on the phone with the reservation department of a hotel, wondering if there were any rooms left at the special group rate for GA attendees. "I'll be in town for the conference," I said. "I'm with the UUs." "Who?" she said. "I'm attending the General Assembly of our religious denomination," I explained. "I'm with the Unitarian Universalists." "Oh," she says, "sounds like you must be a big group." "Huh?" "I'm wondering if we are going to have more folks at this General Assembly than usual." "Well, yes," she says, giggling. "You are the Universe Church." We were both laughing, but she seemed to realize that maybe it wasn't good to be poking fun at a customer's religion. So she started explaining herself by repeating the joke again. "You know," she said, you've got universe in your name, so you must—" I get it. That's funny. Or at least it's ironic, because we're actually a tiny religion, at least in the number of people who are part of our congregations. "I do wish there were more of us," I said. Soon we were talking reservations, and our little joke about the big Unitarian Universalist religion was a thing of the past. But I haven't forgotten it. Because truth be told, it kind of bums me out. Not because I think we should or even could be the church of the universe. I just want us to be who we are. I want us to be who we are at our core. Who we are before we told ourselves we're just a tiny religion. Who we are before we told ourselves that we're just a predominantly white, middle to middle upper class religion, as though that's all we've yearned to help create. Who we are before we became satisfied with just a few new members each year in our congregations. We tell ourselves we want to be a religion for our time, but mostly we play small. We often shrink from taking risks. We self-deprecate. We make excuses for ourselves, abandoning the very passion and yearning for beloved community that brought many of us to this UU religion in the first place. And that's why throughout my ministry, I've loved taking field trips to other congregations, especially at the start of new ministries, like I did a few weeks ago when I had the honor to attend the installation service of our friend and former ministerial intern, the Reverend Linda Barnes. There's so much promise and possibility at the start of a new ministry, especially for someone talented like Linda. So much dreaming. I love the invitation inherent in these services to imagine a Unitarian Universalism that's more healthy and vibrant and meaningful and influential and just more altogether awesome. My first visit to a UU church was really just a field trip. Maybe some of you are on a field trip like that this morning. I suspect many of you first came here that way. I had spent most of the previous decade avoiding religion when I first showed up in a UU church. I still held many of the values I had received growing up in Christian congregations: the importance of loving my neighbor, the need for compassion, the necessity of forgiveness. But I'd come to see that ideas about God held too tightly were often divisive and sometimes dangerous. Could there be a religion that would leave space for believers and non-believers alike? A religion that would leave space for me? I found that space in my first UU church, the Community Church of New York. And I remember my first Sunday there, how moved I was by banners representing world religions hanging throughout the sanctuary. How delighted I was by the evidence in the hymnal that theological diversity was welcomed. Unitarian Universalism clicked with me. It clicked because I knew that I had the freedom to believe not on someone else's terms and with their terms, but on my own, with my own. And I knew that others had the same opportunity and that it was better for us all that we were doing it together. 5 years later, I graduated from theological school. I was ordained into the UU ministry, and I began serving this church, buoyed by my calling to grow our religion, and inspired by the interest of members here at that time to grow this church as well. I was inspired to be a part of something vibrant and meaningful and bursting with possibilities for this world we share and our lives in it. And in my 16 years of ministry with you, I've seen us grow our understandings of who we are and who we can be. I've pushed this congregation at times, and at times you've pushed me. And I've kept taking field trips, learning from other congregations. My first sabbatical about 8 or 9 years ago had lots of field trips in it as I traveled to and learned from staff and lay leaders of larger UU congregations around the country. Many of the wise decisions we've made over the past 8 years here were a product of those field trips and the learning that I experienced. But this morning I want to tell you about another field trip, one that some of you probably remember. I think it has a lot to offer us about who we are as a religion and who we could be. A few years ago, my wife Susan had an assignment in one of her graduate classes at Drake to experience another culture. She was talking over her options with me when I suggested that I would go with her if she paid a visit to the local megachurch, the Lutheran Church of Hope. I'd been meaning to check it out, to see for myself this church where thousands of people in Des Moines had found their spiritual home. This church that had grown from a simple suburban startup congregation with about 20 people attending each week in the mid-90s to a church with so many members and friends they have to rent out Wells Fargo to hold their Easter Sunday service. A church that now has 5 satellite locations. I'd heard about the rock music and movie clips they play during services, the video games and children's classes, the coffee shop where attendees can grab a latte before settling into stadium-style seating with cup holders. I hadn't heard as much about their outreach and community service, but a glance at their website indicates they do a fair amount of it. I also hadn't heard much about their small group ministry program, but I knew enough about how megachurches operate to know that without having a multitude of small groups or ways for people to make meaningful connections and build community, the congregation never would have grown the way that it has. Susan agreed to go, so the first weekend of December that year, we went as a family to Lutheran Church of Hope for their 5 p.m. Sunday service. About 10 minutes before the start time, we found ourselves in a long line of cars heading toward the church. I got in the wrong lane and had to wait for the hospitality of strangers who were entering the parking lot to let me cut in. Nearly a dozen cars drove past without anyone taking notice of my turn signal and allowing me to enter. You can imagine my snarky thoughts at that moment. Not very Christian of them. And then I thought about how unfriendly the parking arrangement can be at our church, and I shut up. After finally securing a parking spot and walking through the doors of the church, we were instantly greeted by someone with a smile and a hello. The gathering space was light and airy and huge, like a mall, only bigger. Upon entering the sanctuary, we must have been quite the sight as we were gawking at the enormous facility with the towering wall of water, big video screens, impressive lighting and sound systems. People were streaming in with us, many carrying coffee drinks. As a band alternated between updated Christmas carols and contemporary Christian music, the congregation was encouraged to stand and sing along to words projected onto screens. Before long, a man identified as a teaching pastor came out to welcome people, to offer some announcements and reminders. A Bible passage was read, and then the lead minister, Pastor Mike, came out and offered a 45-minute Advent-themed sermon on getting ready for the return of Jesus, about getting our spiritual house in order, because when Judgment Day comes, probably when we least expect it, the sheep will be separated from the goats. And spiritual apathy, he said, will not get us into the sheep camp. He told an anecdote about being late for a sale at a department store on Black Friday, about how he didn't get the mattress pad he wanted, drawing a parallel to Jesus' parable of 10 virgins as told in Matthew, a parable about being ready for the day of judgment, implying that if you let opportunities pass you by, you may not get another chance. In this case, he was talking about opportunities to get right with God, to surrender to Jesus. But then, about 30 minutes into the sermon, he transitioned into surrendering to forgiveness, about letting go of those wrongs that others have done, not just for their sake, but for ours. At a couple of key moments, the room went dark, and a clip from a movie starring Dennis Quaid was played, a movie in which a father and a son had to work through a long-standing conflict that had driven them apart. By the final clip near the climax of the sermon, in Hollywood fashion, the two men had been reconciled. Pastor Mike's words about forgiveness were familiar to me, and I could sense probably helpful to those in the congregation maybe struggling with conflict in their own families. And who isn't struggling with conflict in their own families? However, the theological basis for Pastor Mike's sermon was quite different from what I would have referenced. When his brand of religion led him to focus on the end times, on the eventual judgment we will all face from a God who would damn us to hell for not believing in him, I had to struggle to stay connected to his message. But when he spoke about the challenges that we face as a result of being human, challenges that result from our refusal to see our lives on earth as temporary, conflicts that arise from our pride-filled resistance to give other people a break, to love, and to forgive, I leaned forward. When he spoke about the life here and now, I was with him. But when he spoke about eternal life as though he knew what that meant, I struggled not to shut down. Now, I don't deny Pastor Mike's brand of Christianity, and I'm not suggesting that it is necessarily wrong or bad. It just doesn't work for me. It just doesn't work for me. On the way home from the service, I had a lot on my mind. Even if some of my theological buttons had been pushed, I appreciated a good deal of what I had experienced there. I loved the invitational approach of what they do, how visitors there are clearly just as important, if not more important, than members. And I marveled at the several pages of offerings for small group classes and connections. And I was inspired by the obvious financial commitments that the members there have made to build the church into what it has become. The members of Lutheran Church of Hope have clearly had a vision for sharing their congregation, and they have followed that vision through. And why wouldn't they? They believe in their mission. They believe that it matters. And for several thousand people in central Iowa each week, it does. The leaders of that church are not playing small. They are not holding anything back. And good for them. But here's the thing. Sitting in their service, listening to their music and their message, helped remind me that what we do as Unitarian Universalists matters too. It matters a lot. In fact, from my one trip to Lutheran Church of Hope, I had effectively cemented once again just why I value our UU approach to religion so much. And don't get me wrong, Unitarian Universalists are far from perfect. We don't always live up to the ideals we proclaim. And let's face it, we have a lot to learn from congregations like Hope. But it was striking for me to realize the many things I take for granted about my religion that were missing for me in the Hope experience. For example, how we UUs, at our best anyway, aim to leave space for difference, for disagreements on questions of ultimacy. How we expect that people will enter our doors with different opinions or no opinion at all about God, and that we wouldn't want it any other way. Or how when I or Reverend Aaron or Reverend Linda or any other UU minister speaks, we aren't stating the so-called truth for anyone other than ourselves. And by modeling humility when we speak about big questions and speculative matters, we are striving to invite our congregations and communities to do the same. At the Hope service I attended, there was no reference to the earth, no music about anything other than God or Jesus, no wisdom outside the realm of Christianity, except for a few Hollywood movie clips. For all there was at Lutheran Church of Hope, I missed a lot. Knowing that one of the origins of the word religious is the Latin religare, which means to bind, to connect, to reconnect, I believe I had a profound Unitarian Universalist religious experience visiting Lutheran Church of Hope because I was connected once again to what matters most to me and to many of you that I've had the honor to serve. As it turns out, I had a newsletter column to write that night. I'd been procrastinating, It's not the favorite thing for ministers, newsletter column writing. But this time it was easy. I knew what I had to write. I invited the members of this congregation to go on a field trip to Lutheran Church of Hope, trusting that the folks here at the time would experience what they valued in our congregation by being there, that they might have what I would call a religious experience too. Just as I hadn't denied the truth of Pastor Mike's perspective for him or for his congregation, I trusted those who took me up on my offer here wouldn't either. In fact, I figured that they too would want to try to connect with what was happening there the best that they could, to grapple with what they experienced, to gratefully receive what was true for them, and respectfully discard the rest or translate it into terms they could work with, to add it to their mix of understandings. See, that's how I define what it means to be religious as a Unitarian Universalist. It is to be curious, to be open, to be interested in difference, seeking to understand, looking for connections with others, yearning for community amidst diversity, striving for health and justice and religious freedom, not just for a chosen few, but for everyone. Over the next few weeks, many of our members took on this assignment, many of us going to services in groups, talking with each other afterwards about what had been experienced, sharing some creative interchange, building connections, opening minds and hearts to what might be possible in our church. In a sermon the next month, I admitted to the congregation that I had invited them to go to Hope, because I wanted them to look around at that place and ask themselves what it might take for us to support and grow our congregation the way they clearly do there. Is what we do any less important than what they do? Seriously. I mean, sure, they have a lot of groups, thousands of members, a big influence on their community, but do they offer a comprehensive, honest sexuality curriculum for all ages? A program Planned Parenthood envies. They don't, but we do. Did they at the time stand up for marriage equality? Did they believe that marriage matters for all families? Did they have a minister who had officiated at more than 60 same-sex wedding ceremonies, who spoke at public hearings for marriage equality? They don't, but we do. Do they participate in broad-based community organizing efforts like Amos, collaborating with other congregations to work on issues like juvenile justice, mental health, economic justice, workforce development, to create a community where all can succeed? They don't. We do. Do they consider becoming a sanctuary congregation, prepared to provide sanctuary for immigrants being unfairly treated by our justice system, a decision members of this congregation will vote on at our annual meeting next Sunday? Do they offer classes in understanding structural racism, invite their members to participate in a white supremacy teach-in, as you did last week, or display a Black Lives Matter banner on their church? They don't. We do. Do they invite their members to visit a congregation practicing another religion in town, to learn and to be inspired? I'm mostly sure they don't. We do. Much of who we need to be, we already are. We just need to live more boldly, more creatively, more generously, more publicly. Over the years since that field trip to Lutheran Church of Hope, I'm not sure how much we have actually incorporated what we learned into our congregation, but still I wonder, what could this congregation do to be more bold in the days ahead in some of the ways Hope is? I'm confident that the interim minister who will serve with you for the next 2 years will do their part to get you thinking boldly, but I'd like to invite you to think about how you will bring out the best in your future ministers too. How can you be who you already are so that more people can't help but want to be a part of your mission and your vision? Now, I say all this to you this morning, keenly aware that there are some difficult dynamics playing out right now in Unitarian Universalism. Most of you probably don't even know this is going on, but I can tell you that our association staff in Boston has been called out for its contributions to structural racism in hiring decisions, a common, some would say, inevitable reality in all but the most self-reflective and evolved nonprofit organizations in this country. I acknowledge that when white supremacy is our shared heritage, not always consciously chosen, but oftentimes unconsciously perpetuated, being who we are at our core may not be enough. The adherents of this faith will also need to do what we have always done throughout history. We will need to learn and to change. Structural change is rarely easy, but the rewards can be great, especially if the change is humbly sought, with curiosity, with priority given to the values that we claim to embody, values like fairness, justice, the inherent worth and dignity of all people. Along these lines, there's a proposal that will be considered at this year's General Assembly in New Orleans to add an eighth principle. It reads, the draft anyway does, we, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying toward spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and in our institutions. Now, I believe the objective of this proposed principle, no matter which form it ultimately takes, is one in line with what will be necessary if Unitarian Universalism is to truly be a religion for our time, for this time. But I also believe we must not relinquish the other core priorities of our faith along the way: hospitality, welcome, living in accordance with all of our principles. In essence, being who we are when we are at our very best. One more field trip story. A few years ago, our congregation was invited to participate in a UU initiative called Leap of Faith, which took leaders from our church to Albuquerque, New Mexico, to learn from members and staff of that vibrant, growing congregation. Upon our arrival for learning on one given weekend in January, a married couple named Dave and Barb picked me up from the airport. On the drive into town, they explained how they had recently moved to Albuquerque to be closer to their adult daughter and her family, and they shared with me how delighted they were to have found the church. They'd quickly joined, they'd become active members. The wife said, "Mark, the UU religion expresses what I've always believed. To think that I spent more than 30 years in other churches where I never really fit. I now know," she said, "I've been a UU all my life." I'm delighted by this story, the same way I am when anyone finds a fit with us, but I must tell you, this story is heartbreaking for me too. It's heartbreaking because Dave and Barb, these kind, vibrant people who now know they have always been Unitarian Universalists, were born, raised, and lived nearly their entire adult lives in a city that has a UU church. A city where they would have found kindred souls and a place for their spirit had they ever visited that church. A city named Des Moines, Iowa. Weep wah. They were here when I was here. They were here when most of you were here. I'm just saying. How many other Dave and Barb Johnsons are out there? Waiting for their opportunity to discover the place they should have always been. Waiting for you to let them know that you are here and to welcome them when they arrive. Waiting to be welcomed home at last. I believe Unitarian Universalists have played small long enough. I still want us to play big. Even after I'm gone, my hope is that this congregation will continue to grow in number and in spirit, that you will be a beacon for people seeking liberal religion in this community, that you too will have people who hear about how brave and exciting you are and who want to be a part of what you are doing. Next year, 5 years, 20 years from now, I don't expect this congregation to have morphed into a version of Lutheran Church of Hope, as if you even could. I just want you to be your best selves as Unitarian Universalists, welcoming, curious, open, generous, connected to our community and to each other. I want people in central Iowa to be impressed with your vision for sharing your liberal religious values and approach with others in the community. I want people to say that the members of this congregation don't play small, that you don't hold anything back. That is my hope. Could it be your hope too? Let's stand as we're able and join in singing hymn 1026.